Imagine waking up, you're groggy, reaching for your alarm clock, and you realize it's set an hour earlier than you normally wake up.
Right, which is just annoying.
Yeah, you just think, oh, well, I must have bumped it. So you go into the kitchen, and your coffee mug, the one you always leave on the left side of the sink, is sitting on the right side.
Harmless, right. Like just a minor glitch in the matrix.
Exactly. Completely mundane. A detail so small, your brain almost filters it out entirely.
Because why would you notice that?
Right. But imagine that happens every single day. Imagine that the mug keeps moving. Imagine your alarm clock keeps changing.
Oh, wow.
Imagine you walk outside and every time you cross the street, someone in a red jacket coughs loudly. Day after day, week after week.
Yeah.
It's orchestrated by dozens, maybe hundreds of people around you, and it is intentionally designed to make you think you are completely, irreversibly losing your mind.
It's a terrifying concept, honestly, because it weaponizes the ordinary. It takes the absolute safety of your daily routine and transforms it into this psychological minefield where you can't even trust your own memory.
Well, welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are going on a mission to explore the chilling and frankly bizarre evolution of state-sponsored psychological warfare and organized harassment.
Yeah, it's a heavy topic.
It really is. We want to understand how governments and even local communities have historically weaponized paranoia, social isolation, and just the mundane details of daily life against individuals. And perhaps most unsettling of all, we're going to look at how those exact tactics persist today.
It is a dark journey, but an essential one if we want to understand the actual mechanics of social control. Because this isn't about dystopian fiction, you know. This is about documented operational methodology.
Right. And to do this, we are unpacking a massive stack of source material today.
A literal mountain of paper.
Seriously. We have an extensive, highly detailed report by Paul Wolf breaking down the FBI's COINTELPRO operations. We have deeply researched historical records of the East German Stasi's psychological warfare tactics, which was known as Zersetzung.
Such a brutal word.
Yeah. And we also have contemporary manuals, support documents like the Bounce Black Initiative, and vast archives of victim accounts detailing the modern phenomenon of organized community harassment, which is often referred to as gang stalking.
And looking at these three distinct eras side by side reveals a pattern of behavioral manipulation that is incredibly consistent. The technology changes, sure, and the political backdrop changes, but the core psychological attack remains practically identical.
Now, before we really get into the weeds here, I need to make something explicitly clear to you, the listener.
Very important point.
Yeah, our sources today cover highly politically charged events. They involve intense, often violent actions taken against both left-wing groups and right-wing groups. We are not taking sides here. We are not endorsing any political viewpoints, nor are we condemning any specific ideology. Our mission in this deep dive is simply to unpack the factual claims and the historical records presented in our source material.
Exactly. We want to understand the mechanics of these operations, how they work, why they work.
That is a crucial distinction. We are looking at the machinery of repression, not litigating the politics of the targets.
We are studying the blueprints of the weapon, regardless of who it was pointed at.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the heavy hand of COINTELPRO. This was the FBI's formal domestic counterintelligence program, operating roughly between 1956 and 1971 under Director J. Edgar Hoover.
Right, the Hoover era.
And reading through the Paul Wolf report, the text immediately presents us with a massive paradox about the nature of the state.
It really highlights the United States image as this global beacon of democracy, right? A place where freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and political assembly are enshrined in the highest laws of the land.
Yeah, exactly.
Yet, simultaneously, behind closed doors, the FBI was functioning essentially as a secret political police force. During this specific period, they investigated roughly 20,000 people.
20,000.
And they weren't investigating them for bank robbery or espionage. These 20,000 people were investigated solely based on their political views.
Just their beliefs. And the stated mission of COINTELPRO wasn't just to passively observe them or keep tabs on them.
Right, not at all.
The internal memos explicitly state the goal was to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize groups they deemed threats. And the net was cast incredibly wide.
But massively wide. We're talking about black nationalists, the American Indian movement, the New Left, Puerto Rican independence groups, and even right-wing extremist groups.
But I want to zero in on that word neutralize.
Yeah.
Because that sounds like a sterile, bureaucratic term. But what did that actually mean on the ground?
Well, the definition of neutralization is really the key to understanding the entire era. In traditional law enforcement, the goal is to investigate a crime, gather forensic evidence, secure a grand jury indictment, and get a judicial conviction in a court of law.
Right, a legal process with constitutional protections.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But COINTELPRO flipped that paradigm entirely. Neutralization wasn't about securing a conviction for a crime. It was about rendering the target completely incapable of engaging in political activity by literally any means necessary.
See, I'm trying to wrap my head around the logistics of this. If they aren't prosecuting you, how is the FBI justifying the budget and the manpower for this? Like, what is the actual day-to-day mechanism of ruining someone's life without arresting them?
They destroyed your life from the inside out,
Yeah.
utilizing the target's own social ecosystem. They used a variety of tactics.
Like what?
Well, one of the most insidious, which is heavily detailed in the sources, was called snitch jacketing.
Snitch jacketing.
Yeah, this is where the FBI would forge documents, fabricate informant payment records, or plant physical evidence to make a genuine, loyal activist look like a police informant or a CIA agent.
So you take the most charismatic leader of a movement, and you systematically convince their own followers that they are a traitor working for the government.
Precisely. Let's think about the mechanics of how that works. A movement relies entirely on trust.
Of course.
If you are planning protests or engaging in civil disobedience, you have to trust the people beside you. So the FBI would quietly slip a forged receipt showing a monthly payment from the Bureau into the leader's desk.
Oh, man.
Or they'd arrange for a known police officer to publicly thank the activist for their help. It completely isolates the target, alienates them from their support system, and breeds massive factionalism and paranoia within the group.
Because if you can't trust the person next to you in the trenches, the movement just collapses inward.
And it's an operational cancer. You don't even have to fight the group. You just inject paranoia and let them tear themselves apart.
That is wild. The report also details black bag jobs, which were warrantless burglaries of homes and offices. But they weren't always stealing things, right?
No, sometimes they were just planting bugs or copying mailing lists so they could map the social network.
Right. And they heavily relied on anonymous letters. They would send letters to a target spouse accusing them of infidelity to destroy their marriage.
Yeah.
Or send letters to rival political factions to incite actual lethal street warfare.
The factional violence was entirely engineered in some cases. The FBI sent forged letters full of insults and threats between the Black Panther Party and a rival group called the U.S. Organization, specifically hoping to spark retaliatory shootings.
And it worked.
It worked.
Yeah.
People actually died because of those forged letters.
That is just wow. Let's ground this in some of the specific case studies from the text, because the scale of this is hard to fathom until you look at individual human lives. Take Martin Luther King Jr.
Right.
The FBI's paranoia regarding King, as documented in these memos, is almost unbelievable.
The internal documents show a rapidly escalating obsession. By 1963, right after the I Have a Dream speech at the March on Washington, an internal FBI memo from Assistant Director William C. Sullivan explicitly stated, and I'm quoting here, "We must mark him now as the most dangerous Negro in the future of this nation."
Knows the phrasing there.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't dangerous because of a crime he committed, but dangerous from the standpoint of national security simply because he could mobilize people.
And this culminated in something truly horrific in 1964. King was about to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. You would think the FBI might back off an internationally recognized peace laureate.
You would hope so.
But the reaction was to escalate dramatically. Sullivan had an FBI audio technician create a composite tape allegedly spliced together from hidden wiretaps of King's various hotel rooms over several years, supposedly proving sexual indiscretions.
Yep.
They packaged this tape with an anonymous letter and sent it directly to King's home, knowing his wife might open it.
The letter itself, which is quoted at length in the source text, is a masterpiece of psychological cruelty.
So dark.
It calls King a colossal fraud and an evil, abnormal beast. But the truly chilling part is the ultimatum. It gives him exactly 34 days to commit suicide before the tape is released to the national media.
It is the ultimate psychological attack. They are using the threat of total social and historical annihilation as a weapon to drive a man to take his own life.
And they fully intended to use the media as an accessory to this terror. The FBI actually offered the surveillance transcripts to Benjamin Bradley, who was at Newsweek at the time.
Really?
Yeah, but he refused to publish them. The intent wasn't law enforcement. It was complete psychological and social destruction.
And when psychological destruction wasn't enough, or if the target proved too resilient, it escalated to raw physical violence. The Paul Wolfe text extensively details the FBI's campaign against the Black Panther Party, particularly the assassination of Fred Hampton in Chicago in 1969.
The Hampton assassination is a prime example of the lethal end of the neutralization spectrum. Hampton was incredibly effective at building coalitions. To stop him, the FBI utilized an infiltrator named William O'Neill.
And O'Neill wasn't just a low-level member, right?
No, he had risen to become the chief of security for the Panthers and Hampton's personal bodyguard. O'Neill provided his FBI handler with a highly detailed floor plan of Hampton's apartment.
And it wasn't just a basic sketch. The floor plan marked exactly which bed Hampton slept in.
Yes.
And during the pre-dawn police raid, the tactical team didn't just exchange fire. The ballistic evidence showed the police gunfire was directed overwhelmingly and specifically into the inside corners of the apartment where Hampton was sleeping. He was killed in his bed.
The Bureau's efforts also extended to aggressively framing individuals, corrupting the judicial process entirely.
Right.
Look at the case of Geronimo Pratt, a decorated veteran and a Black Panther leader in Los Angeles. He was convicted of the tennis court murder in Santa Monica. But the source material details how the FBI actively suppressed crucial evidence.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, Pratt maintained he was 400 miles away in Oakland at a Black Panther meeting during the time of the murder.
Which the FBI knew was true because they had wiretaps proving it.
That is the staggering part. Years later, when journalists and lawyers finally got their hands on the files through requests under the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, it was revealed the FBI had wiretapped the Oakland facility and knew Pratt was there.
Unbelievable.
They buried the exculpatory evidence. Furthermore, the key witness against him, a man named Julius Butler, was later revealed to be an FBI informant.
And the prosecution just went along with it.
The prosecution actively denied Butler was an informant during the trial. Pratt spent 27 years in a maximum security prison before his conviction was finally vacated.
27 years stolen based on a deliberate lie by the state. It's like a taxpayer-funded reverse PR firm. Instead of spending millions to build a brand or launch a product, the government spent millions to systematically dismantle human reputations, forge evidence, and end lives.
That's a highly accurate analogy. They were engineers of ruin, and they applied these tactics across a vast geographic and demographic landscape. Look at the American Indian Movement, or AIM, at the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota in the 1970s. The text describes this shift in tactics. They moved from the urban centers, where they fought the Panthers, into rural environments, effectively launching a full-fledged counterinsurgency war.
So we're talking about the aftermath of the 1973 siege of Wounded Knee.
Yes. The FBI's approach here was entirely different from urban wiretapping. They essentially armed and supported right-wing vigilante groups on the reservation, known as Goon Squad's Guardians of the Oglala Nation.
The FBI armed them.
The documents state the FBI supplied these proxy forces with automatic weapons and intelligence. The result was a reign of terror. Over 60 unsolved murders of AIM members and supporters occurred on the reservation over a 3-year period.
60 murders.
The murder rate there was mathematically equivalent to the political violence in Chile after the military coup.
And the government's response to the violence wasn't to disarm the vigilantes, it was to aggressively prosecute the victims of the violence. They filed 542 separate federal charges against AIM leaders, tying them up in court, draining their financial resources, and effectively removing them from political organizing.
It's neutralization by bureaucracy.
Exactly. And this brings us to the deeply controversial case of Leonard Peltier, who the text points out is still in federal prison today.
The Peltier case is a masterclass in how the state neutralizes an opponent when they decide the rules no longer apply. Following a chaotic and deadly firefight that left 2 FBI agents and 1 AIM member dead, the FBI decided to put the full, crushing weight of the government against Peltier.
Just zeroed in on him.
Yeah. To get him extradited from Canada, the sources show the government used affidavits from a woman named Myrtle Pourbaix, who claimed she was Peltier's girlfriend and saw him shoot the agents.
But that wasn't true.
Not at all. The government later admitted they knew she was deeply psychologically troubled, had never met Peltier, and her testimony was entirely false.
But the extradition went through anyway. And during the trial, they presented ballistics evidence linking Peltier's rifle to the fatal shots. But again, the Freedom of Information Act documents later revealed a teletype from an FBI ballistics expert stating that the shell casing found at the scene did not match Peltier's weapon. They hid that teletype from the jury.
Because the goal wasn't to find the factual truth of what happened that day, The goal was removing a specific political actor from the board permanently.
And we must address a very complex, deeply uncomfortable dynamic revealed in the Paul Wolf report regarding right-wing groups, specifically the Ku Klux Klan and a group called the Secret Army Organization, or SAO.
This is where the bureaucratic justification of these programs gets incredibly murky.
Right.
The FBI did have a formal COINTELPRO directed at white hate groups. They heavily infiltrated the KKK. The church committee hearings in the 1970s revealed a staggering statistic. More than 1/4 of all active Klan members during that period were actually FBI agents or paid informants.
Over 25%. I have to pause here because the logistics make no sense. If you control 25% of an organization, you effectively control the organization. Why didn't they just dismantle the Klan from the inside immediately?
You would logically think that would be the outcome. But the sources reveal a terrifying moral hazard inherent in this kind of deep cover infiltration. These informants were not neutral, passive observers quietly taking notes.
No.
To maintain their cover, to prove they weren't cops, and to rise to leadership positions where they could gather better intel, they actively participated in and sometimes organized horrific violence.
So the state is funding the terrorism to monitor the terrorists.
Essentially, yes. A notorious informant named Gary Thomas Rowe was involved in the murder of civil rights worker Viola Liuzzo. The FBI knew beforehand that the Birmingham police were colluding with the Klan to brutally attack the Freedom Riders, yet they allowed the attacks to happen to protect their informants' identities.
That is just wow.
The bureaucracy prioritized the intelligence-gathering apparatus over human life.
And it gets even more direct. In the 1979 Greensboro massacre, where 5 Communist Workers' Party members were murdered by a combined group of Klan and neo-Nazis in broad daylight, the sources indicate the deadly posse was actually led by an FBI infiltrator.
Yes.
And furthermore, a federal agent from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the BATF, actually helped the Klan obtain the automatic weapons used in the attack.
It paints a picture of a state apparatus that didn't just observe violence, but actively cultivated it, sometimes acting as the logistical catalyst for the very threats they were supposed to be preventing.
And the collateral damage of all these operations was devastating, reaching far beyond the political activists themselves. I'm thinking of the actress Jean Seberg.
Seberg's case is a prime example of how wide the neutralization net was cast. Seberg was a very famous white Hollywood actress who financially supported the Black Panthers and other civil rights groups.
So she had a target on her back.
Exactly. Because of her financial support and her high profile, she was targeted. An FBI agent requested formal approval to plant a fabricated story with prominent Hollywood gossip columnists.
And what was the story?
The story claimed Seberg, who was visibly pregnant at the time, was carrying the child of a Black Panther leader, not her husband.
And director Hoover approved it personally.
He did. The story ran in the Los Angeles Times and Newsweek. The psychological shock, the public humiliation, and the sudden, intense media harassment caused Seberg to go into premature labor. The baby died 2 days later.
And her response to that trauma is just heart-wrenching. She held a press conference and brought the fetus in a glass jar to prove to the world that the child was white, to literally prove the FBI's lie.
The trauma completely shattered her. The sources note she attempted suicide every year on the anniversary of her child's death, and she finally succeeded in 1979. The FBI destroyed her life without ever charging her with a single crime.
It is breathtakingly cruel. But, as the Paul Wolf text notes, COINTELPRO eventually came to an end, at least in its formal, paper trail-heavy capacity. In 1971, a group of activists broke into an FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania, stole a massive cache of files, and mailed them to the press.
That burglary was the death knell for the formal program. COINTELPRO was ruthlessly effective, but its reliance on overt violence, fatal police raids, massive physical surveillance, and most importantly, prolific, detailed bureaucratic paper trails eventually led to its public exposure.
It was undeniable once the paper was out.
Exactly. It became a massive scandal and an international embarrassment for the United States.
And this leads us to a fascinating and chilling evolution in the methodology of state control. If you are an authoritarian state, say somewhere in Europe, and you're watching the massive public backlash to COINTELPRO in the U.S., you ask yourself a crucial question.
Right. How does a state suppress domestic dissent without leaving a trail of martyrs, without triggering massive public protests, and without generating a mountain of damning paperwork that can be leaked?
And for the answer to that, we have to transition across the Atlantic, behind the Iron Curtain, to East Germany. We are looking at the Stasi, the Ministry for State Security, and their development of a methodology known as Zersitzung.
Yes.
Versitzung. It's a harsh-sounding German word that translates directly to decomposition, decay, or biodegradation. It literally means breaking something down into its base components until it rots away.
To understand why they developed this, we have to look at the political context of the 1970s. Erich Honecker had replaced Walter Ulbricht as the leader of the German Democratic Republic, or GDR.
Okay, setting the stage.
Honecker desperately wanted international respectability. He wanted to engage with the West, secure loans, and sign the Helsinki Accords, which required paying lip service to human rights.
So you can't just be throwing people in the gulag anymore.
Exactly. You simply cannot do that if you are constantly holding Stalinist show trials, executing dissidents in public, or throwing thousands of people into brutal, visible prison camps. Mass terror is a bad look on the international diplomatic stage.
So they needed a way to make their enemies disappear. Not physically, but psychologically.
Precisely. The official Stasi directive stated the goal of Zersetzung was to preventatively impede hostile and negative activities by paralyzing the target behind a facade of social normality.
A facade of social normality.
They wanted to switch off regime opponents by inducing severe, seemingly organic personal crises. Think about it. If a dissident is entirely consumed by the fact that their marriage is suddenly falling apart, they've inexplicably lost their job, their neighbors hate them, and they feel like they're quite literally losing their grip on reality.
They do not have the time, the energy, or the credibility to write anti-government pamphlets or organize a protest.
Exactly.
And the scale of this operation is staggering. This wasn't just a few rogue agents doing this in a basement. This was literal textbook psychological warfare. It was formulated into a highly rigid methodology and formally taught at the Stasi's College of Law in Potsdam.
It was a highly bureaucratized science of human destruction. The Stasi created what they called sociograms and psychograms.
Which were what, exactly?
They would map out a target's entire life network. They would detail their friends, family, colleagues, their doctors, their bank managers. They searched relentlessly for vulnerability.
Looking for leverage.
Yeah. Did the target have a secret pornography habit? Were they secretly in debt? Did they have a strained marriage? A chronic health issue? A past professional failure? They cataloged the human soul. Once they found the weak point, they applied targeted, invisible pressure.
It's like an autoimmune disease, but engineered by the state. The state tricks your social network, the very people who are supposed to protect and support you, into attacking you. And they had the manpower to do it because they built an absolute army of informants.
A massive army.
The historical sources estimate they had anywhere between 170,000 and over 500,000 informal collaborators, or IMs. We're talking about everyday people, landlords, bank tellers, postal workers, doctors, even youths as young as 14 were recruited to spy on their parents.
The Stasi embedded themselves into the very fabric of East German civic life. If you were a targeted individual, your reality was no longer your own. It was entirely manipulated by the state through the people around you.
Right.
And this is where those bizarre gaslighting techniques you mentioned in the intro really come into play.
Right. The Stasi actually had a formal term for it, leaving visible traces of presence. They would use master lockpicks to enter a target's home while they were at work, but they wouldn't steal anything of value.
Because that would be a normal crime.
Exactly. They would just alter the environment slightly, move the socks to a different drawer, change the type of tea in the cupboard, replace the hand towel with a slightly different shade of blue, set the alarm clock to go off at 3 a.m. instead of 6 a.m.
If we connect this to the broader theories of operational psychology, the goal is to systematically destroy the victim's self-confidence and their basic grip on reality. It is a slow, methodical drip of unexplainable minor events that erode your sanity.
I have to pause and push back on this a little bit because on the surface, the sheer banality of these tactics seems almost ridiculous.
How so?
Well, if I go to my wife or my best friend and I say, I think the secret police broke into my apartment today, and they ask what was stolen, and I reply, nothing, but they moved my tea bags to the bottom shelf, I sound completely unhinged. I sound like a paranoid schizophrenic.
And that is the actual terrible genius of the system. That is exactly how silent repression works. By complaining about the harassment, the victim willingly diagnoses themselves as paranoid to the outside world.
Oh, wow.
The Stasi intentionally chose tactics that sounded fundamentally absurd to an outside observer. It guarantees that the victim will not be believed, even by their closest confidants. It perfectly alienates them from their support structure.
So the absurdity is the point.
The most insidious aspect of Zersetzung, as the historical sources repeatedly note, is that its victims are almost invariably not believed.
And it wasn't just moving tea bags. They actively destroyed the most intimate social bonds. They would send anonymous, forged letters to spouses detailing fake affairs. They used a specific division of operatives called Romeo agents.
Right.
These were handsome, charming Stasi officers whose sole operational job was to seduce a target's wife to destroy the marriage. The text specifically mentions the attempted seduction of a dissident named Ulrich Popp, orchestrated purely to break down her marriage and isolate her.
Yeah, and they would spread rumors in the neighborhood that a target was a pedophile or an informant themselves, essentially stealing the snitch-jacketing playbook directly from COINTELPRO.
Just repurposing it for the suburbs.
They also weaponized the administrative state to a terrifying degree. They would arrange for a target to be constantly passed over for promotion at work, or they would arbitrarily revoke their driver's license or travel permits without explanation.
Just constant friction.
Exactly. They would even interfere with medical treatment. The Stasi actively collaborated with head physicians at major hospitals. There is deeply disturbing evidence in the sources suggesting the Stasi may have used hidden, weaponized X-ray devices to deliberately irradiate high-profile dissidents like Jürgen Fuchs and Rudolf Barrow, who both later died of incredibly rare forms of cancer.
God, that is terrifying.
Fuchs famously called Zersetzung an assault on the human soul.
It's the complete invasion of the self. And what makes it so uniquely dark is that the Stasi intentionally concealed their role. The victim rarely knew it was the government.
They had no idea.
They just thought they were having a spectacularly terrible run of luck. Their wife left them. They got fired. They are losing their memory. They got cancer. Everything in their life was collapsing, and they had absolutely no idea the state was pulling the strings.
It was a perfectly closed loop of psychological torture. You couldn't report it to the police because the local police were part of the informant network. You couldn't take anyone to court because there was no specific law on the books against moving socks or spreading workplace rumors.
The ultimate loophole.
The foundational legal concept of nulla poena sine ligae no penalty without a law meant that even after the wall fell, the Stasi operators could almost never be prosecuted for the totality of the psychological damage they inflicted. They never committed recognizable crime.
Okay, so COINTELPRO was officially disbanded in the 70s. The Stasi fell along with the Berlin Wall in 1989. You would logically think these nightmarish, deeply bureaucratic tactics were relegated to the dustbin of history.
You would hope.
But our contemporary sources, specifically the Bounce Black Initiative Manual and the vast archives of Scrib's support documents, reveal something deeply disturbing. These exact methodologies didn't disappear. They simply evolved. They decentralized.
This raises a profoundly important question for the modern era. What happens when the highly refined tools of state-sponsored psychological warfare are adopted by localized groups, private corporations, or decentralized community networks? We arrive at what the modern sources call organized harassment, or gang stalking.
The sources define this as a form of coordinated, covert community harassment targeting specific individuals. The targets are rarely high-level political figures anymore.
No, the demographic has shifted.
They are often corporate whistleblowers, people who have filed contentious workplace grievances, local political dissidents, or just vulnerable, marginalized individuals. And the operational goal is exactly the same as the Stasi's Zersetzung: to silence, retaliate against, or intimidate the target into total submission, institutionalization, or suicide.
To understand how this works in a modern context, we have to look closely at the systemic structure outlined in the Bounce Black documents. It almost always begins with the hijacking of legitimate, well-intentioned civic systems, like occupational health and safety laws or community policing networks.
Right, what the manual is called the community notification system.
Yes. In many jurisdictions, authorities, neighborhood watches, or community groups can flag individuals who are deemed a potential threat to public safety or who have a history of aggressive behavior. The theory behind this is public safety.
Sure, keeping the neighborhood safe.
But the sources argued this system is routinely weaponized. A target is falsely flagged, often by someone with a personal vendetta or a corporate interest. A warning marker is placed on their file. And then a covert notification is sent out to their apartment rental manager, their future employers, local store owners, and community watch groups.
So before you even walk into a room, before you even apply for a job or try to rent an apartment, the people in that room have been quietly told that you are a threat, a thief, or dangerously mentally unstable. Your reputation is poisoned before you even speak a word.
And just like the Stasi's vast network of informal collaborators, the local community is actively recruited to monitor the target. But this monitoring isn't passive observation.
It's active.
It manifests as relentless daily harassment. Coordinated foot patrols, vehicular stalking where multiple cars will box a target in on the highway. The sources detail the extensive use of subtle hand signals and color-coordinated clothing used by civilian informants to track the target's movements through a grocery store or down a suburban street.
And this leads to a phase the documents call psychiatric reprisal. The harassment is perfectly scientifically calibrated to provoke a public breakdown.
Right.
Think about it. If you are followed every time you leave your house, aggressively cut off in traffic every day, stared at by strangers, and deliberately blocked in line at the grocery store for months on end, eventually your nervous system's going to snap. And when you finally snap and yell at someone in the produce aisle,
You instantly validate the initial community notification.
Ex-
The community looks at you and says, "See? We were warned this person was unstable and aggressive, and look at how they are screaming at this poor shopper." It becomes a flawless, self-fulfilling prophecy. And it directly mirrors the old Soviet tactic of declaring political dissidents mentally unfit and institutionalizing them. You don't have to debate a whistleblower's claims if you can prove they are insane.
I want to dig into the actual mechanics of the street-level harassment because here's where it gets really interesting and deeply psychological. The manuals discuss a specific technique heavily utilized by the stalkers called classical conditioning.
This is a textbook psychological operation adapted for neighborhood streets. Over a period of weeks or months, the perpetrators will systematically sensitize the target to a specific, otherwise completely mundane, everyday stimulus.
Let's break down exactly how that works. We're talking about basic Pavlovian mechanics, but applied to human trauma.
Exactly. The stimulus could be anything. It could be a specific bright color, like a neon red jacket. It could be the sound of a ballpoint pen clicking rapidly, keys jangling, or a very specific loud type of cough.
Okay, so just normal background noise.
But the harassment network will subject the target to intensely stressful, threatening, or invasive situations, and during those peak moments of stress, they will clearly present this stimulus. They will crowd the target on a subway while someone in a red jacket coughs loudly.
Wiring the brain to associate the two.
Eventually, the target's amygdala, the fear center of the brain, creates a permanent neurological link between the everyday stimulus, the cough, and the feeling of being hunted and in mortal danger.
So once the target is sensitized, the stalkers don't even have to do anything overtly aggressive or illegal anymore. A target could be sitting in a perfectly quiet, safe coffee shop. A perpetrator walks in, sits at the table next to them, looks at them, and just clicks a pen over and over.
Yeah.
To the barista, to everyone else in the coffee shop, it's just a guy fidgeting with a pen. But to the target, it is an air raid siren. It triggers a massive, uncontrollable physiological trauma response.
And if the target reacts, if they leap up and aggressively confront the person clicking the pen, who looks like the aggressor,
The target does.
the tactic is practically flawless because it utilizes the absolute plausible deniability of the mundane. It is the exact same mechanism the Stasi used when moving the alarm clock. You cannot call the police and say, "A man is clicking a pen at me."
The human toll of this, reading through the victim archives in the script documents, is absolutely devastating. The documents outline the distinct psychological stages a victim goes through as their reality is dismantled.
It's a very predictable progression.
It usually starts with shock and denial, the absolute refusal to believe that a modern community could be so heartless, or that they, an average person, are specifically being targeted by a coordinated network.
Which is inevitably followed by degradation. The relentless slander campaigns in their neighborhood, the false rumors spread at their workplace, the physical intrusion into their personal space, it strips the individual of their basic human dignity.
Then comes doubt. They begin to doubt their own sanity, but much worse, they begin to doubt the motives of everyone around them. If the barista is rude to them one morning, is it just because the coffee shop is busy, or is the barista part of the harassment network?
Right, the paranoia sets in.
The victim completely loses the ability to trust human interaction. This leads to extreme social isolation. They barricade themselves indoors, they stop seeing friends, they almost always lose their jobs because the harassment extends to the workplace, or the constant hypervigilance makes them unable to concentrate on basic tasks.
And the end game is grim.
The ultimate stated goal, as the Bounce Black document explicitly warns, is to drive the person into a spiritual crisis that ends in self-harm and suicide.
Which forces us to confront a profoundly uncomfortable question about human nature. Why do everyday citizens participate in this? We aren't talking about highly trained, ideologically motivated FBI agents or sworn Stasi officers here. We are talking about suburban neighbors, office coworkers, and local shopkeepers. Why do they agree to torture a stranger?
It's a very dark twist on community building. The sources suggest people participate because they fundamentally want to feel like they belong to an in-crowd. Joining a neighborhood watch or a community action group is an easy way to make friends. It gives people a shared purpose.
That makes sense in a twisted way.
It breaks down barriers of race, age, and gender within a community, but it does so by unifying them against a common enemy, completely destroying an innocent person's life in the process. It's community cohesion forged entirely through shared cruelty.
We also have to heavily account for coercion and authority bias. Many participants are approached by community leaders, private security firms, or off-duty law enforcement and told that the target is highly dangerous.
Like, what do they tell them?
They are told the person is a secret pedophile, a drug dealer, or a violent threat to the neighborhood children. They are told they are acting as heroic undercover spies, keeping their communities safe. It gives a bored suburbanite a thrilling sense of power, espionage, and righteous justification.
That makes them feel like the good guys.
Exactly. And of course, there is the powerful mechanism of peer pressure. If everyone in your local neighborhood watch is participating in the harassment, you join in to ensure you aren't the next one labeled a threat and targeted yourself.
So we have to pull all of this together. What does this all mean for us today? We've looked at the explosive, fatal, paper-heavy, centralized operations of COINTELPRO in America.
Yeah.
We've looked at the bureaucratic, deeply invisible, psychological terror of the Stasi's Zersetzung in East Germany. And we've looked at the modern, decentralized, crowdsourced nightmare of organized community harassment outlined in the Bounce Black manuals.
If we synthesize these three eras, we see that the ultimate operational goal across all of them is identical: to make the target unemployable, destitute, perfectly isolated, and ultimately drive them to self-destruction without ever having to put them on trial.
Without a single day in court.
And the common, terrifying thread binding them all is the deliberate weaponization of the target's own social fabric against them.
It relies entirely on the fragility of what psychologists call consensus reality.
Exactly. As human beings, we are fundamentally social pack creatures. We rely heavily on the people around us to help us interpret what is real and what is not. Our reality is a mirror held up by our community.
That's a great way to put it.
If your neighbors, your colleagues, your local police, and even your own family are manipulated into treating you like a dangerous threat or treating you like you are completely insane, your own mind will eventually break under the weight of that consensus. If everyone in the world treats you like a monster, you inevitably begin to question if you actually are one.
And the sources show that these exact Zersetzung tactics are still allegedly used at the highest levels of international espionage today.
Oh, absolutely.
The text mentions the documented harassment of U.S. diplomats by Russian intelligence in 2016, where agents would break into diplomats' homes just to move their furniture around or kill their pets. And a deeply chilling detail: CIA officers stationed in Israel coming home to find the food in their refrigerators carefully rearranged.
It's the Stasi playbook. The plausible deniability of the mundane, alive and well in the 21st century.
It is the ultimate form of asymmetrical warfare. It requires almost no physical violence, leaves practically no forensic evidence, costs very little money, and utilizes the ambient, everyday environment of the target as the primary weapon.
Now, you, listening to this deep dive, might be thinking, well, this is fascinating history, but I'm not a political dissident. I'm not a corporate whistleblower. I'm just a normal person. Why should I care about gang stalking or psychological operations?
Exactly. What does this have to do with me?
You must care, because the tools of social destruction rely entirely on the passive compliance and the willful ignorance of everyday people. These systems of harassment only function if the community agrees to participate, or, just as importantly, agrees to look the other way when someone complains that it's happening to them.
Exactly. This deep dive challenges us to look closely at our own everyday behavior. How quickly do you accept a malicious rumor about a coworker without seeing evidence? How readily do you share a community alert on a neighborhood app about a suspicious person without demanding actual proof of a crime? We have to be acutely aware of the danger of participating in whisper campaigns or collective unexamined ostracization. The line between being a concerned, vigilant citizen and becoming an informal collaborator for a harassment network is dangerously thin.
It requires a rigorous, conscious commitment to critical thinking. When a sudden consensus forms against an individual in your community or workplace, especially a consensus that leads to their complete social isolation, we have a deep moral obligation to pause, question the source, and examine the motives behind that consensus.
We've covered incredible dark ground today, from the FBI using the media and forged letters to try and force Martin Luther King Jr. to commit suicide, to the Stasi breaking into apartments just to change the time on an alarm clock and drive people insane, all the way to modern neighborhood watches using classical Pavlovian conditioning to trigger trauma responses and whistleblowers.
It is a sobering, necessary look at the extreme lengths to which power will go to maintain control, and how easily human psychology and community bonds can be hacked and dismantled.
I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to chew on. Think about the massive, incredibly expensive physical infrastructure the Stasi had to build to accomplish Zersetzung. They needed hundreds of thousands of human informants.
It was a massive operation.
They needed thousands of people sitting in rooms physically steaming open letters. They needed teams to follow targets down the street in cars and experts to pick locks and sneak into apartments just to discover a person's psychological weaknesses.
It was incredibly labor-intensive and required a massive percentage of the state's GDP.
But today, we willingly give that exact same data away for free. We feed our psychograms directly to algorithms. Think about your own digital footprint right now.
Oh, that's a scary thought.
Your private search history, revealing your deepest fears and medical questions. Your smart home devices listening in your living room. Your phone tracking your physical location down to the exact meter every second of the day.
Yeah.
If an entity, whether that's a government, a malicious corporation, or a decentralized network of harassers, wanted to isolate you, feed you customized paranoia, or socially ruin you today, they wouldn't need to recruit your neighbor to spy on you. They wouldn't need to pick your lock and break in to move your socks. They could do it entirely, seamlessly, through the glowing screens you stare at every single day.
It's already built for them.
Are we inadvertently, happily building the ultimate frictionless infrastructure for automated psychological warfare?
When the panopticon is digital, and we willingly carry the surveillance devices in our own pockets, the potential for a new, automated AI-driven era of Zersetzung is not just possible, it is highly probable.
It makes you wonder, the next time you wake up and your alarm clock is set an hour early, or that coffee mug isn't quite where you left it, is it just a glitch in your memory? Or are you just finally paying attention? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of paranoia. Keep asking hard questions, stay incredibly curious, and always, always think critically about the consensus reality built around you.